Hi, I'm Laura Lee Siemens, and you're watching the Bible study, and we are doing the book of Daniel, and we are on chapter 5 now. So we're going to start off with chapter 5, and there's a really cool thing I want to talk about before we jump into Daniel chapter 5. For many, many years, people used Daniel chapter 5 to prove that the Bible wasn't historically accurate. Now, anytime you hear that the Bible is not historically accurate, what you need to do is just wait a little bit, because what will happen is that history will prove the Bible is actually accurate. So in Daniel chapter 5, the king's name is Belshazzar. Now, if you remember when I said Daniel chapter 1, when Daniel was given a new name, his new name was Belshazzar, and I said that's kind of confusing because later on in Daniel, we have another character whose name was similar, and this is the character's name who's similar. It's Belshazzar. So Daniel's name is Belshazzar, like you're belching, that's how I kind of remember it. And this is Belshazzar without the T. All right, so Belshazzar is the king. Now, historians would say that this proved that the book of Daniel was historically inaccurate because they have no historical record of there being a king of Babylon named Belshazzar. Also, it says that Belshazzar's father was Nebuchadnezzar, but they had no documents of King Nebuchadnezzar having a son named Belshazzar. So for many, many years, they used this as proof that the Bible had some historical inaccuracies. But, like I said, just wait a little while. So archaeologists ended up finding a letter that had been written from Nebuchadnezzar's son, who was the king of Babylon at this time, and it was written to his son named Belshazzar. And in this letter, we see that the king, who was the king of Babylon at the time, was gone, and he was at war and doing different things and fighting and traveling around the world. And he had left his son, Belshazzar, in charge of the kingdom. So Belshazzar, it says here that he was the king, but he was the king, he was in charge at the time. He was next in line to be king. He was acting as king, but the actual king was away. Also, when it says that his father was Nebuchadnezzar, we know that that in the Jewish ways, they don't say like father, grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather. They just say father. So like, for instance, they would say that Jesus was the son of David. Well, he was like the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson of David. Probably not that many greats. But they don't say grandfather, they just say father. So when he would say that his father, Nebuchadnezzar, it was actually his grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar. So in the end, what they ended up proving was that the Bible was actually historically correct and there's more historical evidence in the Bible than the historical evidence that they had at the time. So they just had to wait until they found more historical evidence, and then it proved that the Bible was right all along. It's very interesting because at the very end of the book of Daniel, Belshazzar makes Daniel third highest in the kingdom, which is interesting because why would he make him third highest in the kingdom? Well, it's because Belshazzar was actually the second highest in the kingdom. So he couldn't make him second highest because he would have taken over his own position, because the first highest was the king who wasn't there at the time. Okay, so we start off here. None of that is actually written in here. That was just a side note to get you started on chapter 5. All right, so Belshazzar is the king, and he makes this huge feast. And basically it's just this big party, and it's lasting for like days and days. And while he's there, in chapter 2, it says that he commands that the gold and silver vessels, which his father Nebuchadnezzar has taken from the temple, which had been in Jerusalem, that they would bring those things and they would party with them. So here's where he's saying his father Nebuchadnezzar, and we know that that was actually his grandfather. All right, so all that is brought, he gets the special things. Remember chapter 1, we talked about how the Babylonians went into Solomon's temple and took the gold and silver that was meant to be used for worshiping God, and that they brought it to Babylon. So here, Belshazzar is like, hey, why don't you go get all those gold and silver cups we stole from the temple and bring them here, and we're going to use them to party hardy. I know I'm old, right? Party hardy. All right. One of the things right to start off with this is to remember that we left off King Nebuchadnezzar, that he had learned to worship God, and that the ends with chapter 4 is a letter that he writes to people, and it's basically a worship letter to God, and it's him telling all the people of Babylon why he's worshiping God and how great God is. But remember, you can't inherit from your parents or from your grandparents love of God. You have to find that yourself. And so we can see here that Belshazzar has not found that, and that he's still worshiping himself and he's not worshiping God. So he's having this huge party, and while he's having this huge party, the weirdest thing happens. So all of a sudden this hand, just a big, giant floating hand, not attached to anything, starts to write on the wall. So that would be scary, but I love when you read the Bible and you could just stop and really dissect verses, because what you will find actually is that God has a really good sense of humor, and there's a lot of really funny things in the Bible if you just stop and read slowly. So here we see in chapter 5, verse 6, then the king's countenance changed and his thoughts troubled him. And here's how it's described. So that the joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked together. So I picture like Tom and Jerry cartoon here is what I'm picturing, right? Where his hips are loosened and his knees start to knock together. So he's basically freaking out, and he feels like he's about to faint, and his knees are literally banging together, which makes sense. There's a giant hand floating and writing on the wall. Okay, that's probably how you would react. So then what does he do? He calls for his mother. So the queen shows up. So he feels like he's going to pass out. His knees are knocking together, and he calls out for people to bring his mom to him. Kind of funny. I don't know. I find that humorous. Okay. So his mom comes, and she says that she knows someone, and this is from the verse, in whom is the spirit of the holy God. So what is Daniel's reputation at this point? He is known as somebody who has the spirit of the holy God. And that's really amazing if you think about it. That is his reputation. I mean, goals, right? That should be our goals. So Daniel comes, calls Daniel, Daniel comes, and Belshazzar says to him, I have heard of you that the Spirit of God is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. So that is his reputation. Pretty awesome. So then Daniel goes on and he explains to him what is written on the wall. So first what's written is Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. And I might not be pronouncing that correctly, but I tried. Okay, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. So what that means, means God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. And that's said twice, which is, okay, that's like a lot of emphasis. If you think about it, he said, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. So he has it twice. All right, Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. So what does that mean? So say if you go to the store and you say like, how much is this highlighter? And they'll say $2, so then you give them $2. But what they would do is they would put it on a scale, and then you would put your money on the scale, and it would go until it was the amount that it's supposed to be, and then that's how they would know how much you owed. But if it was like, then you were wanting more and you were not good enough. So he was weighed in the balances and found to be wanting. In other words, you were not good enough, and you failed miserably. Okay, and then Upharsin. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So, think back to chapter 2. Let's see if we can remember. We had the head of gold, and then we had silver, and then the tummy was bronze, and then our legs were iron, and then our toes were iron and clay. So remember, it was Babylon, Medes and Persians, Greece, Rome, and then like Europe and the UN. So while Daniel is still alive, he begins to see this actually taking place. So he says, yes, the head is gone now, Medes and Persians are taking over. So he says, Medes and Persians are going to come in. So what does he do when he gets this, finds this out, this is going to happen? Belshazzar makes Daniel the third most important person in the kingdom, which, like I said, that shows the historical value of that, because now we know he was actually the second in command and not the first in command. And that very night, so this is how chapter 5 ends, verse 30. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So next comes the Medes and the Persians, and they're going to be. So Daniel, remember, he was a captive. He was a Jewish person, captive, brought to Babylon, and now he's going to be a captive again. And remember, it's not just Daniel. Remember, this is how many years? 70 years of this time out for the Jewish people. So the Jewish people were taken captive, they're brought into Babylon, and then remember in chapter 3, laws are passed that no one's allowed to say anything bad about their religion or about their love of God, and no one's allowed to say anything bad about their God. And then after that, the king writes this letter saying that their God is actually the true God. So God is doing stuff with them while they're captive, and he is creating an atmosphere for them to grow closer to him. And now they're going to be captives again. So the captives are going to become captives. And so what is going to happen to them? And we will find that out as we continue on. We're going to be going on to chapter 6 next. So go back now, read chapter 5. Try to find some humor in it. Maybe I'm the only one who finds humor in that, but I just find that part hilarious. So go back and read through it. And then while you're reading through it, I want you to think about goals for your reputation and how you want to be known. And pray about that. And read through it, pray about that, and then meet me back here tomorrow morning where we will start chapter 6. I'm Laura Lee Siemens, and you're watching the Bible study, and that was Daniel chapter 5.